A lot of people with sourdough baking get a little bit confused about the timing, and time is very important in the whole process of baking. So I thought I'd share with you something. I've kind of modified a table that I found online from this great website called The Perfect Loaf. So I really encourage you to take a look on that website if you want to get more into baking. But this is kind of how also we bake at home usually. So I'll just go through all the days of the week with you, and hopefully that'll make sense. So on a usual weekdays, we keep our starter in the fridge. It doesn't do anything. You don't need to take it out. You don't need to feed it. The temperatures in the fridge are keeping that starter very like dormant, almost like there's just not much happening. There's a little bit of fermentation going on, but it's really calm. There's not much happening. Now, either you can take out that starter from the fridge on Thursday night. Now, we often don't. We actually do this on Friday. But if you want to be 100% sure that your starter is bubbly and fresh and happy, you can already start feeding it on a Thursday. But let's say you do it on a Friday instead. You can feed it before going to bed, but at least take it out of the fridge so that the temperature is kind of going up. Then on Saturday, this is actually today's Sunday, but on the schedule, that's your Saturday. So feeding the starter early in the morning. Most of you guys probably took out your starter this morning and fed it 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour. And you're letting that ferment until midday. And that's around now is what I mean. So again, a starter will tell you when it's ready by growing and bubbling. And I'll show you in a second how you can check if it's ready to bake with. And then once you've got that starter ready, that means you can really start the baking process. We can then do the bulk ferment, so that's keeping it out of the fridge and really letting it rise. And then after that, you're going to shape the dough, place it in a tin or in a proofing basket if you have that, and then you put it in the fridge overnight. Then the rest of that starter that you didn't use, you're putting that back into the fridge. So it's going back into its fridge space for approximately a week. If you're going to bake again a week later, if you're not going to bake, make sure you take it out and just feed it. It needs to be fed about once a week. Then Sunday morning, so this is going to be then tomorrow morning, you would take the loaf out of your fridge and bake it. Okay, is that clear for everyone? Does anyone have any questions about the general schedule, like the rough schedule? You can use the raise hand function as well. Okay, I see Donna has a question. Donna, I'm gonna just unmute you. Or you can unmute yourself as well.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. With regards to putting the starter in the fridge, do you feed the starter first before putting in the fridge, or you can just put it in the fridge anytime?
Usually if I feed it before putting it in the fridge. However, like today, I've got my starter here. Since I fed my starter this morning at 9, and now I'm going to use it a few hours later. So then basically I consider that already feeding, and it's been fine like that for the last 2 years of baking. So as long as you fed it on the same day within the last couple of hours, you're fine, I think. You don't need to like give it an extra feeder.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, Michelle's got a question. Let's see. Just gonna find Michelle. Oh, in the chat. Okay, Joel, what was the question Michelle had?
What do you mean by refresh?
So what do you mean by refresh was the question. Good question. So refreshing actually means, I think you mean on the Friday thing, it says refresh, right? Yeah, so that's feeding it. So that's actually, you're basically taking out part of the starter, and you can discard it. However, I'd use that. You can use it to actually make crackers or pancakes. You can use it for different purposes. But what you want to do is you want to usually just use about like a tablespoon of starter, and you're feeding that. So you don't want to have like a ton of starter and then feed just on top of that, if you know what I mean, like, because you're actually trying to get all the microbes and everything to expand, and to, like, you're feeding a small population which is then growing, rather than feeding a larger population which can't grow as much, because some of those microbes are actually dying as well in that starter. So I think once Oliver told me, and I thought that was the clearest thing, is just take like a tablespoon of starter and use that for like your actual dough starter, because that's more than enough for what you need for a bread. I hope that kind of clarifies a bit, Michelle. Any other quick questions on the baking schedule? Nope. Okay, I'm just gonna continue on then. We can always go back to things at the end. It's maybe good to just get through everything. I don't want this to take too long. We're already about halfway in. So this is the basic recipe. I think probably most of you guys have seen a similar recipe online before, I'm assuming. So this is the one I'm using from, I think this is the tartine bread recipe that I was given by Oliver at a Bread for Change event, and I really like it, and it works for me like as a good basic recipe. So in there you've got water, flour, active starter, and salt. It's so simple, just 4 main like ingredients, right? And the starter being, of course, a mix of water and flour, which is pretty cool because that's just fermented water and flour. Just some very basic things about this. Water, I use filtered water. Maybe I can show you. Can you see my camera? Yep. So maybe you can see. So we use one of these water filters. Yeah. And we just put water through it, and it actually filters out some of the chlorine. Now, where we learned to bake was actually at a farm where we used rainwater, so that also is chlorine-free, of course. But I think you can use just normal tap water, but it's always good to kind of leave it out maybe for a night, and some of that chlorine also evaporates. The other thing, flour, you want good quality, and I would say organic baker's flour is the best you can use. We use honest to goodness flour. So honest to goodness in Sydney, you can order very large bags. So we ordered 12.5 kilo bags at once, which really reduces the amount of waste. You know, it comes in paper packaging as well. It's great. Yeah, it works really well for us. I also use rye flour usually in the mix, and I also use whole wheat flour. There are so many different recipes you can use. Once you get the basics down, you can go online, find lots of different mixes, and it's really fun to test with different blends of flours, of different types of ferments. But if you just are starting, I highly recommend just use the white baker's flour. It'll give you a nice fluffy sourdough, and I think it's quite yeah, it's quite a nice feeling when it works the first time. So I don't recommend to use more than 20% like whole wheat flour in your first loaf. You can use a little bit if you like, but maybe go for a high percentage of white flour for your first loaf. Then active starter, 100 grams, really simple, and salt, 10 grams. Now, I know like a lot of people want to reduce their salt intake, and I totally understand that, and you can put lower salt. However, for the flavor, I think it really matters to put a good amount of salt. Maybe, again, just the first time, try the recipe, just try this amount, and then if you think it's too much, you can always reduce it later and see how it affects the flavor of your bread. Just go to my notes 1 second, because there was a few. I think, yeah, something that I've heard many people say, and I totally agree with sourdough baking, is that we should actually be treating temperature as an ingredient. So I didn't put it in the list because I wanted to simplify the list for you. But temperature is really important. It's like if you have experience with some kind of fermentation, you will know that ferments change, like for example, between wintertime and summertime. So in the summertime, you may leave something out for a few days and it's already bubbly and like crazy because it's 30 degrees in your living room. But in the wintertime, the exact same ingredients will just be sitting still and nothing will happen, right? So really think about this and think about how long the process might take in winter versus summer. So right now, we're here in Sydney. It's, I think today is about 20 degrees out-ish. It's quite a nice day, actually. And yeah, I think in the wintertime, it usually takes us approximately 4 to 5 hours to activate the starter from the morning until now. I fed my starter at 9 a.m. No, I can't actually see what I'm sharing on my screen. Can you see it well? It would be good if I can just see what I'm sharing. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I put a rubber band this morning where I fed it at 9, and then it's already doubled in volume. So you can already, I don't know if you can see those little bubbles in there. But it's starting to look good, and that's about 5 hours later. And then, or it's actually, yeah, about 4.5. But then also for the bulk ferment, so in a moment when we make the dough, that part is taking about 5 or 6 hours in the wintertime, and in the summertime, it can go much, much quicker. So you've really got to be engaged and take a good look at your dough and how quickly it's growing or not. And also keep in mind that you can influence the temperature through keeping your dough and doing this now. Yeah, great. Okay, I wasn't sure. Perfect. So that's my digital scale right there. And this is the starter container that I always use. So it's, as you can see, there's like kind of like old starter on the sides. That's totally fine. Like that just dries out a little bit in the fridge. I've got a tiny bit of, I've got starter in there, a few spoons worth. And here I'm making sure that my scale is tared so that it's showing 0 grams, right? And now I'm going to add filtered water. So again, doesn't matter if you add the flour or the water first. There's no difference really in that. But this is like, yeah, this is a very common ritual when you've got a sourdough starter. You always put the water and the flour. So, and then here I've got I'm using 100% white flour for this. So now I'm putting 50 grams of white flour on top of there. And as you can see, I'm trying to be pretty, oh, you can see it's a little bit more. It's actually 55 grams. I think it's because I put 55 grams of water. Yeah. And then I'm mixing it with this spoon. Make sure you mix it through really well. As you'll learn, like if you get into like the rye sourdough and stuff, you can actually add rye, like partial percentages of other kinds of flours in there. But this is all I do. So just mix it for a second. That's modern technology, right? So we've got our 360 grams of water, right? And then we're gonna put our starter on top. So this is Sourdough right here, Sourdough Junior. I think you can see, look how bubbly it is. It's nice and bubbly. It's got these huge bubbles on it. It's airy. It's looking good to me. So now I'm going to tare my scale again. And now I'm going to add 100 grams of this on top. Try to. Oh, that's okay. Oh, there we go. That's plenty. So this rest, what I've got in here, I'm just going to stick this in the fridge. I don't know if I'm just a lazy baker, but that's my way of doing things, and it works really well for me. So for now, like once I've got my starter in the water, like here, I'm pretty much ready to mix. So I'm mixing this. Let's move it here. I'm going to mix this into the water because that's the easiest way to just have it all kind of dispersed. You could be using slightly warmer water, which in an ideal situation I would do, but just for the purpose of this workshop, I'm just doing it straight with the filtered water without having heated the water in any way. But you could warm it up a little bit, not hot, but around, I think it's around 24 degrees. Oliver, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, awesome.
25 to 40.
25 to 40, okay, yeah, so it's more like, I guess, it should be quite like warm to the touch, but absolutely not hot, because that would also kill the action in there. Okay, so now I'm going to put it back on the scale, tare again. It's very useful, that tare functionality. And we're going to add flour. Oh, scale up. So as you remember from the recipe, and you can go back and check that later, of course, is 500 grams of flour is what we need in here. So basically I'm going to add white baker's flour to this one. Oh, yeah, actually I usually pour it because it's quite a lot. 500, so 10% is 50. 100 grams is, 50 grams, and then 100 grams is 20%. So I want max 100 grams of whole wheat. So I'm just going to go for 400, approximately a little bit more than 400 of white flour, and I'm mixing in, and you don't have to do this, you can just use plain white flour. I'm just filling it up with some rye. I love rye bread, and having some rye in with the white, I find, yeah, it makes a beautiful flavor. So rye flour will make your dough a little bit stickier, actually.
It's a total of 500 grams.
Yeah, 500 grams in there. So now I've got water and starter and flour all together. Now we've actually already combined now almost all the ingredients we have, right? But the one thing we haven't added is the salt. I've already measured out 10 grams of salt. We are not going to put that in just now because what we're doing is called autolyse, which means we are actually just combining the flour with some water so that it can all kind of start to pre-ferment without salt. Because salt, as many of you know who are already fermenting other things, like for instance, what's a good one? Sauerkraut. Salt actually inhibits the fermentation process, so it slows it down, and it also, with sauerkraut and stuff, it's protecting from bad bacteria getting in there. But what we want to do now is just give it some time to sit out without any salt. And if you're mixing this right now with me in your kitchen, you'll see it's pretty like chunky and not super easy to mix through, right? And that's fine. It's going to actually magically become a lot easier to work with once we let it sit now for half an hour. Okay, so I'm roughly mixing this. Just make sure that all that flour is incorporated. You don't have to be perfectionistic about it. Just roughly mix it in so that you have a consistency that looks maybe a little bit like what I have here. It's sticky and it's rough. Like it's not a beautiful soft dough yet, okay? That's going to change with the amazing extra ingredient of time. So just like temperature, time is an essential part of sourdough baking process, yeah? So now this is actually ready to sit and do its little autolyse magic. So what I'm going to do is I have this lid. I'm going to place the lid on top. Now, if you don't have a lid, you can use a wet tea towel. So take a tea towel, make it like quite moist, and put it over the top of your bowl. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a cup of water, and I'm sticking it in my microwave. So this is what I was telling you about before, is that I want to be able to influence temperature a little bit. So I'm just going to microwave the water. This is just one way that you can, that you can make sure that you have a good temperature environment for your dough. So I found that the microwave and an oven would work as well. But microwave is quick because you can just heat up the water and then it creates kind of like a steamed, warm environment in there. But what I'm going to do is stick this bowl right here with my auto-leasing dough into the microwave, and it'll have a nice environment to start to grow. And this is what I do for the bulk ferment as well. Now, people sometimes use an oven light, for example. So if you have a really good oven that you know is going to have like an oven temperature that is at least under 40 degrees when you put that oven light on, you can use that. I've used ovens before where it got a bit too hot, and you really don't want that. You're going to kill like your dough. So please be careful. If you have a thermometer, even better. But I know that this definitely works. So having basically a steamed environment, close the door straight away. So I just opened it, closed it, and I'm keeping all that warm air in there and making sure that I have a nice temperature of the water. I'm sure some people have, but you could literally just put like, you could also boil some water in a kettle, stick it in a cup, and put it in your microwave. So that works too. How much flour did you use in the autolyse? Okay, so that's the recipe that I shared earlier. So 500 grams of flour in total. So that's the total amount of flour we need for this recipe. And I see another question, do you sieve your flour, or sieve? I don't know how to pronounce that. I did not, no. I'm sure some people do, but I guess, we bake every week, and it's just like, we kind of do it pretty roughly now, because you get such a feeling for it the more you do it. If you do it, what is it? We've made at least 100 breads or something, I think, since we started. So I'm not sure. Maybe if anyone else has tried sieving the flour versus not sieving, maybe you can add in the comments in the chat box what your experience was. I don't know if it's actually going to influence. I know it does for certain cakes and other kinds of baking, but yeah. Okay, next question. Specifically excluding air by using a plastic lid. In a way, yes, because what we're doing is the covering of the dough is to make sure that it doesn't dry out. So we do that in this part of the process, as well as all the rest. Whenever you're not working with the dough, you're basically wanting to cover it. You're also wanting to cover it later in the refrigerator, because the fridge will actually really dry out your dough. In half an hour, oh, that reminds me, I'm going to put a timer. So I'll put my timer on for 30 minutes for this autolyse. Now, timers are also your friend. Again, like I said, time is an important variable in baking bread, sourdough bread. So you would like to really, keep a timer and make sure that, especially in the beginning, that when you haven't gotten into a rhythm of this yet, it's good to put a timer also for maybe once you've fed your starter in the morning, set a timer for a few hours later to remember to check your starter, for instance. I think that's a useful way to start off. And I also do it for things like this, the autolyse, as well as the bulk. Once we've done this part, we've let it sit for a while, we add the salt and we do the first stretch and fold, like the mixing part of the sourdough. Then we let it do the bulk ferment, which is several hours outside the fridge. Which I'm going to leave you guys with in your own homes, because I don't want this workshop to go on that long. But after that part, you're going to put it in the fridge, and putting it in the fridge overnight is really good, because it really develops the flavor. And we used to just do it for like an hour or so, because I think when we first learned baking sourdough on a farm we stayed on, the person who taught us said, oh, do at least 30 minutes in the fridge before you bake. But then actually we realized that if we kept it in the fridge for a full night, the flavor was just so much better. Like, we liked it much better. So you can experiment with that and see how you go. But I would also say at least half an hour in the fridge and then bake it. So if you're short on time, you could do that. But I highly recommend to do it at night. Let's see, there's some more questions. I see some recipes where you mix the bread and flour first without the starter for autolyse. So what's the difference between this and when you put the starter in with the flour and water? Very good question, Kathy, thanks. Basically, I'm actually doing that as well now. I learned from various people, and I think I just want to, for now, I'm just trying to simplify it. So this totally works. So we just added the starter to the water, and then we added flour, okay? If you want to do it in a different way, and the official way, according to some recipes, is to put water and flour only together, and then you incorporate the starter and the salt. So please experiment with that, try it. I've been trying it my last few breads and had very good results. They were not that different though. So it's interesting to see, like, if you leave all other kind of variables the same, if you're just changing that part, if it's actually having an effect. So you're free to, try that as well. Just try different combinations, but it's, yeah, interestingly, I haven't had much of a difference in it. So this way I think is very simple to explain for first-time bakers, because you just put water, starter, flour, right? Okay, so Kathy says she hears some people put it in the fridge for a few nights. That's also possible, yeah. Long fermentation of 72 hours, which is meant to make gluten more digestible. Yeah, I've heard that too. So you can really leave breads in the fridge for longer as well. I think once, Joel, remind me, but I think you did did you do 72 hours? Yeah, Joel's done it, and it was a good bread. Yeah, so you can really, that's the great thing about sourdough, is like you can prepare this stuff, maybe you're working from home these days, or you have some time in between gardening or whatever on a weekend. Do this process, stick it in the fridge, and then maybe tomorrow you're out all day, so it's not convenient for you to bake it. You can bake it the next day. thing I prepared earlier. Okay, so this is the tin, and this is the tin I use for a single loaf. Okay, so this is the bread that the same stuff we're doing right now, I basically did yesterday. I haven't seen it yet. Oh, it's looking good. It's so this is a bread, same recipe we're using now, single loaf. It's approximately like I think it's like a 20 centimeter tin, the whole breadth of it, the length of it. And I shaped the loaf last night. Then I put it in here, covered it with foil. Again, covering with foil is to keep the moisture in. So I can see a lot of condensation on here, which means, you know, because it's actually, the fridge really can dry it out a lot. So remember to cover. And yeah, you can just do it in a tin like this. Alternatively, I've also got this. When we make like a round loaf, a big loaf, especially when we make loaves for like gifts or something for friends, which is really nice. You want to make a more beautiful loaf. If you want to make a round one, you pretty much need a Dutch oven. So for those of you who aren't familiar, that's like a Dutch oven. So it's like a lidded enamel coated, what's it called? Cast iron. Yep. Sunday. I'm tired. Sorry, guys. And you bake it in here. You can make like a round. You can shape a round loaf and put it in. There's special baskets you can buy, but you can just use the same bowl that you use to mix all the dough in. So you just put it in there. You shape it, put it in the fridge, and then when you're ready to bake, you put this whole thing in the oven and preheat it so this gets hot, and then you have to be really careful taking off the lid with just using some material to really make sure you don't burn yourself. Put in the bread and then score it. That means like cutting it on the top, and then close the lid again, and then you do the crust on top, right? So you don't need to put hot water at all. You can just put cold water. Some people use a spray bottle. Good point. Joel's just saying that if you use a Dutch oven, maybe don't use ice cubes or cold water because it could theoretically crack the Dutch oven, and those are not cheap. So yeah, you really don't want to you don't want to do that. So I guess maybe that hot water from your question could be related to that. Yeah, so we've got a question on the oven temperature. Now, before I just thought it was like 250, but then through one of Oliver's Bread for Change sessions, I actually learned just crank up that oven to the max. Like you want it really hot because it's difficult, you know, like in bakeries, they have these really special ovens that, you know, they have steam going into the oven while it's baking and stuff. Is really very advanced systems, but we can't, unfortunately, most of us can't afford such a nice oven. So you want to have a really hot oven. We put ours just to the maximum. So it says 250, but I think we've had our oven thermometer in there, and I think it goes over 250 for sure. And that's just when we're heating it up, and you really want to spend about half an hour, 45 minutes getting it up there, get that temperature up before you start baking it for the best results. And then you're baking that for this specific single loaf, you're going to need about 20 minutes on that hot temperature, but covered, right? And then what you're going to do is you're going to take off the cover. So open the oven, take off the cover, lower the temperature to approximately 210 is what I've been doing, so that you don't get a burnt loaf. It'll still have lots of heat in there to make a nice crust, but in my experience, that has been enough for 210 for about 25 minutes approximately. Then you're going to have to adjust the times based on how big your loaf is. So you can always increase. We often at home bake a 1.5 loaf because then we take a few slices, freeze them, and then the rest of the bread we're using throughout the week. And if we happen to want some more, we're doing a big hike and we defrost some bread, it's perfect, and you just have fresh bread whenever you need it. So we do a 1.5 loaf between the two of us. So we live with 2 people here, and then yeah, it works really well for us for like 1 week plus, basically. I always think it's nice to freeze a little bit, yeah, just so that you have some backup when you need it. And it's great. Okay, so here we go. Here's the little video of the shaping. So this would be a few hours from now, so probably this evening. You're going to dust your working surface with flour and turn out the dough just in one piece. Okay. Ooh. Still see it? Yeah. Just in one piece. So you can see it was kind of sticky. So what I'm doing is putting some flour on my hands, putting some flour on the bread. Makes it easier to handle the dough. Then I'm also putting a little bit of extra flour on top because it was just so sticky, the one that I had. Which can happen. And now I'm doing, you know, that stretch and folding I just showed you. So I'm adding a little bit of tension by stretching and folding again. You don't have to do that, but I do it because this is one of the shaping techniques that I learned from YouTube. And now this is where, because I'm making that tin loaf, I'm rolling the dough towards me, and you can see some big bubbles in there. So that means nice and active. You're rolling it towards you whilst tucking in the edges. It's a little bit of a fidgety thing. You can see it's really sticky. And now I'm going to try to slide. Oh, so then you slide the, all right, this was the intermezzo, sorry. This is the oiling the baking tin. So just make sure you oil it, otherwise it's just all going to stick and you won't be a happy baker. So you want to oil it at the bottom. Also, if you're using the cast iron, just put some oil or put, you can put like reusable kind of foil in there. Oh, yeah, and so you scrape it off the surface and really try to keep it intact. And that's all I do. You can see those bubbles in there. I use oats. Oats are cheap, obviously, so those are great to stop it from sticking to the cover. So in this case, the aluminum foil. Yeah, because it will rise in the fridge. So this is the same loaf that you just saw. So it was already quite a lot bigger from the fridge time. I put pumpkin seeds. Yeah, you can put any seeds you really want. You can also mix in seeds in the dough in an earlier stage, of course, if you like, or herbs as well. I like pumpkin seeds, and they turn out really good in the oven too when they get roasted. They're really yummy. Yeah. So just close it with aluminum foil and says, when do you add seeds to the dough? That's at the point of, let's see, when we added the salt, I think you can add it, or even before at the auto-lyse part. But I think it's better, Oliver, maybe you want to jump in, but I think it's like the part where you put in the salt has been fine for me when I added stuff to it. You can also put like olives and stuff. It's really delicious. Is it okay for dough to be sticky? Yes, absolutely. Especially if it's a high hydration dough recipe, it's going to be sticky, and your hands are always going to be covered in dough, and the cleanup is quite, how should I say, it's a little bit annoying sometimes. So just, yeah, you'll probably get a process around how to clean everything, but it's good to really use a lot of water. Once your bowl is empty, put water in it in the sink so that if you use a Dutch oven, should you place the dough in a bowl for the fridge? Yeah. So unless you have, there's something called I think is a banneton, or a like a little, there's special bowls that you can use to make a nice pattern on your bread, and you know, you can use them, but you don't need them. You can actually just use the hand. Same goes for your sourdough starter, by the way. If you use like your sourdough starter home, you saw the container that we're using. It's like, use that like a semi-square, like cubic thing, because it fits easily in our fridge. But it's quite big because when we feed the starter, we want it to be able to expand. And if you are using like this tiny little glass for your starter, it's just going to go everywhere. So I really recommend, especially when you feed that starter, keep in mind it's going to double in volume. So it's just going to, if it's on your all right. So I think we've gotten through most of it. So we saw the scoring. Important thing is after the oven, let your bread rest. Even if you made the most beautiful bread and it smells so good and you're hungry, don't cut it straight away. Leave it for at least, I would say, an hour. Let it cool down internally because it's still like, it's like breathing or whatever I like to call it. Like you want to give it space to breathe. Put it on, take it out of the Dutch oven or out of the tin and put it on like a mesh surface, like some kind of metal cool surface where some air can get in from underneath. Yeah, that's really.
Obviously, I've seen just someone signed up for Bread for Change, but also, I mean, we are both on the Sydney Sourdough Home Bakers, which is actually really becoming really active at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So Oliver just mentioned there's Bread for Change. The way that I wrote it on
Sydney Sourdough Home Bakers would actually be a really good place.
Yeah. So the Sydney Sourdough Home Bakers is great, and like Oliver said, it's just like a great community of bread bakers, and people are posting photos and interesting stuff they changed and everything. So definitely go on there, put your photos on there, and also please put your photos if you have some success on the PSN Facebook